Tonight, we enter one of the most controversial rooms in UFO history. Not a hangar, not a crash site, not a desert base hidden behind warning signs. A room that may never have existed. A room that, according to legend, was filled with scientists, military leaders, intelligence officials, and men powerful enough to decide what humanity would be allowed to know. The name attached to that room is MJ-12, Majestic 12. The alleged secret committee created after Roswell to control the UFO problem, to study recovered technology, to manage the truth, and perhaps to build the first hidden government inside the government. But here's the problem. The MJ-12 documents have never been officially authenticated. The FBI file includes material marked as bogus. Government reviews found no evidence proving the documents were genuine executive branch records, and yet MJ-12 refuses to disappear. Why? Because even if the documents are false, the idea behind them keeps returning. A hidden group, a classified structure, a small circle controlling access, a system sitting above normal oversight, and if you have followed the modern disclosure era, that structure should sound familiar. Special access programs, crash retrieval claims, private aerospace contractors, denied access, compartmentalization, legacy programs. Every major disclosure allegation eventually leads back to the same question. If something extraordinary happened, who was put in charge? That is why MJ-12 matters. Not because we can prove the documents are real, we cannot, but because MJ-12 became the mythological blueprint for the hidden UFO government. Tonight, we separate the claim from the evidence, the documents from the legend, the hoax possibility from the deeper intelligence question. And we ask the question at the center of it all. Was MJ-12 a real secret committee, a clever fabrication, a disinformation operation, or a story that accidentally revealed how UFO secrecy actually works? This is UFO to UAP The Disclosure Report. I am your host, Matt Tones. Thank you for tuning in, and this is MJ-12 Explained. Majestic 12 begins with Roswell, because without Roswell, there is no MJ-12 story. In July 1947, the Roswell Army Airfield announced that it had recovered a flying disc. That announcement is real. It happened. Then the story changed. The recovered disc became a weather balloon. Later official explanations will point toward balloon programs connected to Cold War surveillance. But the damage had already been done. For the first time, a military announcement had connected the United States government directly to a recovered flying disc. Then, almost immediately, that connection was withdrawn. That reversal created a wound in public trust, and into that wound, the modern UFO cover-up story was born. Roswell became the origin point, the place where people began asking, what if the government knows more than it says? What if something was recovered? What if the public explanation was only the surface layer? And if something truly extraordinary had been recovered, who would have been given control? That is the exact question MJ-12 claims to answer. According to the Majestic 12 story, after Roswell, President Harry Truman allegedly authorized a secret group to handle the UFO problem. A group of 12 men, senior military figures, scientists, intelligence officials, policymakers, people with the authority, the technical knowledge, and the security access to manage something that could not be managed publicly. The alleged mission was simple: investigate the phenomenon, control the evidence, study recovered materials, manage public knowledge, and prevent public panic. That is the legend. But legends are not evidence, so we need to slow down. Because the MJ-12 story does not begin in 1947 as a verified historical fact. It enters public UFO culture decades later, and that matters. The most famous MJ-12 documents surfaced in the 1980s. They were not released through a clean official channel. They did not arrive as confirmed government records. They appeared under suspicious circumstances. Photographs, copies, alleged briefing papers, documents said to refer to classified UFO programs, Roswell, President Truman, President Eisenhower, and the management of extraterrestrial evidence. For UFO researchers, the documents were explosive. For skeptics, they were immediately suspect because extraordinary documents require extraordinary authentication. And MJ12 never achieved that. The FBI received versions of the material and the Bureau investigated, and the file that became publicly accessible through the FBI's vault includes the now famous marking, bogus. That word matters. It does not settle every philosophical question about UFO secrecy, but it does tell us something important. From the official investigative standpoint, the documents were not accepted as authentic proof. Later reviews found no evidence that the MJ12 material constituted real executive branch records. So, if we're being careful, and we must be here, we cannot present MJ12 as proven fact. We cannot say Majestic 12 definitely existed. We also cannot say Truman definitely created it. We cannot say Eisenhower was definitely briefed by it. We cannot say it controlled alien technology. That would go beyond the evidence. But the story does not end there, because the MJ12 documents may fail as authenticated records while still succeeding as something else. A window into how people imagine hidden power, a possible disinformation artifact, a psychological operation, a mythology built around real government secrecy, or perhaps a false document wrapped around a real fear. And that fear is simple. What if the UFO issue is never handled through normal government channels? That is where MJ12 becomes important again, because the core idea behind MJ12 is not absurd on its face. Governments do create secret committees. Governments do create advisory panels. Governments do classify scientific information. Governments do compartmentalize sensitive programs. And after World War II, the United States built an enormous national security state. The CIA was created, atomic secrecy intensified, military research expanded, aerospace development accelerated, Cold War intelligence structures became permanent. So the concept of a highly classified advisory group created to handle an unprecedented national security problem is not impossible in theory. The problem is not plausibility, the problem is proof. And that distinction sits at the heart of this episode. Plausibility is not evidence. A good story is not authentication. A document that sounds official is not automatically real. But neither does one debunked document eliminate the larger question. Because even if MJ12 as presented in those documents was false, the government absolutely did create structures to study UFO reports. Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, the CIA Robinson Panel, military intelligence reviews, Air Force investigations. These were real. These were documented. They were part of the historic record. So the deeper question becomes, was MJ12 a fictional exaggeration of real classified concern, or was it a myth created to fill a gap left by incomplete public knowledge? Let's look at what the MJ12 story claims to solve. The UFO mystery has always had three missing pieces. First, who collected the evidence? Second, who decided what the public could know? Third, who controlled the long-term strategy? Officially, the answer changes depending on the period. The Air Force investigated, the CIA reviewed, panels were convened, reports were reproduced, but for the people who believed Roswell involved something extraordinary, those explanations feel incomplete. They ask, if a non-human craft was recovered, would the Air Force simply file it inside an ordinary investigation? Would the public see the paperwork? Would regular congressional committees receive full disclosure, or would a separate structure be created? Something smaller, more secure, more powerful. That is the emotional power of MJ12. It gives shape to the invisible. It gives name to the hidden system. And it answers the question that haunted Roswell. Who took control? Now, let's talk about President Truman. The MJ-12 documents allege Truman authorized the group. That claim is central to the mythology, and it makes narrative sense. Truman was president at a turning point in world history. He oversaw the end of the World War II, the beginning of the Cold War, the creation of the CIA, the rise of atomic secrecy, and the national security structure that would define modern America. So placing MJ-12 under Truman's authority gives the story historical weight. It feels like it belongs to that era. But again, historical fit is not proof. There is no confirmed, authenticated order from Truman establishing MJ-12 as described in the documents, and that matters. Then there is Eisenhower. In UFO mythology, Eisenhower becomes one of the most important presidents. The alleged MJ-12 briefing papers claim he was informed about the situation. Other UFO lore goes much further, claiming meetings with non-human beings, treaties, secret agreements, and underground arrangements. Those claims are much more speculative, and many are unsupportive. But Eisenhower's presence in MJ-12 mythology is not random. He was a military man, a former Supreme Allied commander, a president deeply familiar with classified national security systems. He also famously warned later in his presidency about the military-industrial complex. That phrase has become central to modern UFO speculation, because if hidden technology moved into private industry, if secret programs outgrew democratic oversight, if defense contractors gained control over classified breakthroughs, then Eisenhower's warnings feel almost prophetic. But we need to be careful. Eisenhower's military-industrial complex warning was real, but using that warning to prove MJ-12 is a leap. It may be thematically relevant, it is not documentary proof. And this is where serious UFO analysis must separate resonance from evidence. Some things feel connected. That does not mean they are confirmed. Now, let's examine the documents themselves. The MJ-12 material includes alleged briefing documents and memoranda. They use official-looking language. They reference known historical figures. They place the UFO problem inside national security logic. And that is part of why they fascinated researchers. They did not read like wild science fiction, they read like bureaucracy. And that is what made them powerful, because real secrecy is rarely dramatic. It is administrative. Forms, memoranda, briefings, classification markings, need to know language, restricted access. MJ-12 looked to believers like the paper trail of the hidden system. But skeptics notice problems. Questions about formatting, questions about terminology, questions about typeface, questions about signatures, and questions about provenance, questions about whether the document fit the bureaucratic habits of the time. And the chain of custody was weak, and that is critical. A document this explosive needs a clean origin. Where did it come from? Who handled it? Can it be traced? Can it be verified against archives? Can signatures, dates, language, and formatting survive expert scrutiny? MJ-12 struggled on those questions, and because of that, the documents remain deeply disputed. And here is where the story gets stranger. Even when documents are exposed as suspect, the belief structure can still survive. Because people do not only believe in MJ-12 because of the documents, they believe because MJ-12 explains a pattern. Roswell, secrecy, contradictory statements, missing records, witness intimidation claims, classified programs, later whistleblower allegations, corporate secrecy. MJ-12 becomes the organizing theory, the story that ties everything together. And that is why debunking the documents does not automatically end the myth, because the myth is doing more than presenting paperwork. It is offering a model of power, a model where UFO truth is not hidden by one agency, but managed by a small elite network, a structure above normal oversight, a committee beyond public accountability. That idea remains powerful because modern disclosure allegations often sound similar, not identical, but structurally similar. Think about the reoccurring theme today: special access programs, denied access, legacy retrieval programs, private contractors, congressional frustration, whistleblowers claiming information was withheld, officials saying they could not get answers, whether those claims are true or false. They created an atmosphere in which MJ12 feels newly relevant, not because MJ12 is proven, but because the modern system still appears opaque, and opacity keeps old myths alive. Now, let's bring in the Robinson panel. This is important because the Robinson panel was real. It met in 1953. It reviewed UFO reports. It emerged during a period of heightened concern after major UFO sightings, including the Washington, D.C. events of 1952. The panel did not conclude that UFOs were extraterrestrials. Its concern was more practical: the possibility that UFO reports could overwhelm communication channels, create public panic, or be exploited by adversaries. That is a very intelligence-minded concern, not necessarily what are they, but what does public belief in them do? That matters because the Robinson panel shows that the US government did not only care about UFO objects, it cared about UFO narratives, reports, media attention, public reaction, civilian UFO groups, information flow. And this becomes central to understanding MJ12. Because even if Majestic 12 was not real, the idea that the government wanted to manage UFO perception absolutely has historical grounding. That does not prove a hidden alien committee, but it does show that UFOs were treated as an information problem, and perhaps that is the real legacy. Maybe the hidden system was not built only around recovered craft. Maybe it was built around managing uncertainty, preventing panic, protecting classified aerospace projects, avoiding intelligence overload, monitoring public groups, reducing stigma when useful, increasing stigma when useful, controlling the shape of the narrative. That is far more subtle than the classic MJ12 story, and perhaps more realistic, because governments do not need alien bodies to manage information, they only need uncertainty. Now, we need to talk about disinformation because MJ12 may be one of the most important UFO disinformation cases in history. If the documents were fabricated, who fabricated them and why? There are several possibilities. 1. They were created by private individuals seeking attention. 2. They were created as a hoax to exploit UFO belief. 3. They were created by someone with knowledge of government style but not authentic authority. 4. They were seeded as disinformation, to confuse researchers, to discredit the subject, to contaminate the evidence pool, or to hide a real secret behind false documents. That last possibility is impossible to prove, but it is psychologically powerful, because once false documents enter a field, they poison everything. Researchers waste years arguing authenticity, public trust collapses, serious questions become associated with hoaxes, and the entire subject becomes easier to dismiss. That is why disinformation is so effective. It does not need to convince everyone, it only needs to create confusion, and confusion is the natural climate of the UFO subject. That is why Majestic 12 remains so dangerous as a topic. If you believe too easily, you may fall into mythology. If you dismiss too quickly, you may miss the deeper intelligence pattern. The correct position is harder. Hold the documents at arm's length, but study the structure they describe, because the structure may matter more than the paper. Now, let's talk about the names. MJ12 mythology often included major figures from science, defense, and intelligence. The point of including such names is obvious: authority, credibility. If a secret UFO group existed, it would not be staffed by random people. It would involve people with expertise in aerospace, nuclear science, military command, intelligence, psychology, and policy. Again, that makes narrative sense, but narrative sense is not verification. And this is exactly how persuasive documents work. They combine real names, real historical context, official looking formats, and extraordinary claims, That mixture is powerful because the real elements make the false elements feel more believable. That is a classic pattern in disputed documents. A false document rarely invents anything or everything. It often borrows heavily from truth. That is why MJ12 analysis becomes so difficult. The historical environment was real, the government secrecy was real, the UFO investigations were real, the Cold War anxiety was real, but the specific MJ committee remains unproven, and that is the key. Real context does not automatically authenticate the claim. Now, let's step back. Why did MJ12 explode in the 1980s? The timing matters. By the 1980s, Roswell had been revived in popular culture. UFO books and television specials were reaching larger audiences. Government distrust had grown after Watergate, Vietnam, CIA scandals, and revelations about real covert operations. The public had learned something important: government do hide things. That realization changed how people process UFO claims. Earlier generations may have trusted official explanations more readily, but by the 1980s, the secret UFO committee did not sound impossible to many Americans. It sounded like something government might do. That cultural environment helped MJ12 thrive because belief does not spread only through evidence, it spreads through readiness. And by the 1980s, the public was ready to believe hidden government structures might exist. Now, fast forward to today, the MJ12 story has returned because modern disclosure has recreated the conditions that made it powerful: public distrust, whistleblower claims, congressional frustration, classified program allegations, new government portals, Arrow reports, military videos, private contractor speculation, and once again, people are asking who controls the truth. That is why MJ12 is not dead. It keeps returning because the question it asks was never answered. If there is a UFO secrecy system, where is the control node? Who authorizes access? Who denies it? Who briefs presidents? Who decides what Congress can see? Who decides what the public can know? That is the MJ12 question, and it remains unresolved. Now, we need to be fair to skeptics. Skeptics are not wrong to challenge MJ12. The burden of proof sits with the claim, and the claim is extraordinary. A secret group managing extraterrestrial evidence will be one of the most important discoveries in modern history. That requires more than photocopies, more than rumors, more than suspicious formatting, more than second-hand claims. It requires primary documentation, verified provenance, independent corroboration, archival consistency, and ideally public testimony under legal consequence. MJ12 does not meet that threshold. So if we are being strictly evidentiary, we must say this clearly. MJ12 has not been proven. The documents are disputed. Official findings do not support their authenticity, and the FBI material includes a bogus notation. That is the honest position. But honesty also requires acknowledging something else. The failure of MJ12 documents does not eliminate the reality of government secrecy around UFOs. It does not eliminate classified investigations. It does not eliminate national security concern. It does not eliminate the possibility that other hidden structures existed. It only means MJ12 as presented in those documents remains unverified and likely unreliable. That distinction matters because too often UFO debates collapse into extremes. Either everything is true or everything is fake. Reality is usually messier. A false document can point toward a real anxiety. A hoax can attach itself to a genuine mystery. A myth can grow from classified reality. And a debunked claim can still reveal how people understand power. MJ12 may be exactly that. A myth built around, say that again, a myth built in the shape of secrecy. Now, let's consider the possibility that MJ12 was not a literal committee, but a symbolic one, a name given to a distributed system. Not 12 men sitting in one room, but, say, a network. Scientists, military officials, contractors, intelligence officers, special access managers, private industry, policy gatekeepers. In modern terms, that might be more plausible than the classic MJ12 picture, because modern secrecy is rarely centralized in one dramatic council. It is distributed across compartments. The secret is not protected by one room, it is protected by fragmentation. No one sees the whole picture, everyone sees only their piece. That is the real architecture of secrecy, and in that sense, MJ12 may be obsolete as a literal model, but powerful as a metaphor, because the modern disclosure issue may not be controlled by 12 people, it may be controlled by systems, contracts, classification rules, budgets, private facilities, legal authorities, access lists, and institutional inertia. That is less cinematic, but far more realistic. Now, here is the uncomfortable possibility. Maybe people are searching for MJ12 because they want secrecy to have a face, a committee, a name, a villain, a chain of command. But what if the truth is worse? What if there is no single room, no single group, no single master document? What if the UFO secrecy system, if it exists, is now so fragmented, so privatized, so compartmentalized that nobody fully controls it anymore? That possibility connects directly to everything we have explored in this podcast. Black budgets, special access programs, the Wilson memo, private sector vaults, denied access, disclosure architecture, Roswell. The same thing keeps appearing. The secret may not be hidden in one file, it may be distributed across a system designed never to be seen in full. And that is why MJ12 remains relevant, because it represents the public's attempt to imagine the system as something understandable. A committee, a name, a number, 12. But the real world may be more complex. Now, let's return to Roswell. Roswell created the question. MJ12 offered the answer. Roswell asked, "What happened?" MJ12 answered, "A secret group took control." Even if that answer is false, it became the story people carried forward. Then came Area 51. Then came crash retrieval theories. Then came reverse engineering claims. Then came the Wilson memo. Then came modern whistleblowers. Each generation rebuilt the same architecture with new language. In the 1950s, it was flying saucers. In the 1980s, it was MJ12. In the 1990s, it was Area 51. In the 2020s, it became UAP programs, special access programs, legacy retrievals, and private contractor custody. The terms changed, the structure remained. That is the deeper pattern. A hidden system, a denied truth, a public kept outside, a small group with access. MJ12 is one version of that pattern. Now the question becomes, why does this pattern persist? There are two possible answers. The first answer is skeptical. The pattern persists because humans love hidden order stories. We are pattern-seeking creatures. We distrust powerful institutions. We fill gaps in knowledge with narrative, and UFOs provide the perfect canvas. Unknown objects, classified systems, contradictory statements, cosmic implications. That mixture produces mythology. From this perspective, MJ12 is a modern legend, a bureaucratic ghost story, a fictional committee created to explain uncertainty. The second answer is more unsettling. The pattern persists because there really is something hidden. Maybe not exactly MJ12, maybe not exactly the documents, maybe not exactly the mythology, but some classified structure, some deeper program, some restricted knowledge environment that has never been fully disclosed. From this perspective, MJ12 is not the truth. It is a smoke from a fire somewhere else. Which answer is correct? We do not know. And that is why the story continues. Now, we should address one more thing. A responsible episode on MJ12 cannot treat every related claim equally. Some claims are weak, Some claims are unsupported, some are contradictory, some rely on documents with serious authenticity problems, and some drift into speculation so extreme that they damage serious inquiry. That matters, because if this subject is going to move beyond entertainment, standards matter, evidence matters, language matters. We should say alleged when something is alleged. We should say unverified when something is unverified. We should say disputed when something is disputed. And we should say unknown when something remains unknown. That is not weakness, that is discipline. And without discipline, the UFO subject collapses into noise. Now, let's ask the final question. What is the legacy of MJ12? It is not proof, it is not confirmation, it is not the final key to Roswell. Its legacy is something more complicated. MJ12 taught the public to imagine UFO secrecy as a governance problem, not just a mystery in the sky, not just an aircraft question, not just a science question, a power question. Who knows? Who decides? Who is excluded? Who controls the records? Who writes the official history? That is why MJ12 still matters, because even if the documents are false, the government question remains real. Modern disclosure is now wrestling with that same question. Congress wants answers. Agencies respond carefully. Whistleblowers make allegations. Officials deny conclusions. Documents remain classified, and the public is left watching the same pattern on repeat. Access, denial, secrecy, suspicion. That is the MJ12 shadow. Not necessarily a real committee, but a permanent suspicion that somewhere above the visible system there is another system deciding what can be known. And perhaps that is the true power of MJ12. It gave a name to the fear that democracy does not reach all the way into the classified world, the fear that some truths are managed, not shared, the fear that the most important decision may happen in a room the public will never see. So, where do we land? Very carefully. The MJ12 documents remain unproven. Official reviews do not authenticate them. The FBI file includes a bogus notation, and no definitive public evidence proves Majestic 12 existed as described. But the story survives because it sits on top of a real historical foundation. Roswell was real as a public event. Government UFO investigations were real. The Robinson panel was real. Cold War secrecy was real. Classified aerospace programs were real. Information management was real. And modern disclosure allegations continue to raise questions about hidden access structures. That is why MJ12 cannot simply be laughed away. Not because it is confirmed, but because it reveals the shape of the hidden system people believe exists. Maybe MJ12 was a hoax. Maybe it was disinformation. Maybe it was myth. Maybe it was a distorted echo of something real. But it changed UFO history forever. Because after Majestic 12, the UFO mystery was no longer just about what was seen in the sky. It became about who controlled the truth on the ground, and that question has never gone away. This has been UFO to UAP, the Disclosure Report. I'm your host, Matt Tones. Thank you for tuning in. Please share the episode and don't forget to subscribe.